It's introducing the countervailing perspectives, as many as possible, and just loosening the grip, which seems like it's exactly what happened to you.
Yeah, I remember the way it kind of came to a head was I'd been primed through these little Pebble Moments to finally listen to a TERF. And I remember when I slowed down, I was like, wait, you're saying that female equals woman equals stereotype, right? If learning is easy, you're probably not learning. That you're at that cusp of something greater, of your brain finding a new pathway to handle this, these feelings and this distress. I realized, like, okay, that's just a thought. That is just a thought that I have. I can let that be a thought and it can go, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm feeling bad about being a girl. It can just be like, I feel disoriented by this dynamic. It's not necessarily familiar to me. I notice something is off.
So Soren Aldaco, you're very welcome to Beyond Gender. And this is being released, being recorded especially for Detrans Awareness Day. Because every year, we've tried since 2021. Well, 2021 we formed GenSpecs, and then 2022, I remember asking a few detransitioners I knew, I said, do you have a day? And one of them came back saying, yeah, we got some day together. And so I said, oh, well, what was it? What date? And they said the 12th of March. And so the next year and every year since 2022, we've ran progressively bigger events. Back then it was, online, it was COVID, but it was very powerful. That first one was really, really powerful. I remember Richie Herron came out as a detransitioner after, and I remember he said he had watched it. It was really good. Yeah, it was about 5 hours. Sinead Watson was speaking and some extraordinary people. I remember Michelle Aliva did a brilliant presentation, really good about, analysis. So now Detrans Awareness Day has kind of gathered a lot of momentum. And Soren, it's so funny because, you're our producer and now we're interviewing our producer, so it's all very meta. But Soren, we're just thrilled to have you. You're the obvious choice for Detrans Awareness Day to highlight it for the podcast. So you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stella.
Yeah. Do you want to kick off with some questions, Mia?
Well, we've already interviewed you on Beyond Gender, so what do you think? Can you do, just in case anyone missed the first interview, just your story in a tiny nutshell?
Yeah, I think the TLDR is I started identifying as trans when I was 11. I was on the internet a whole lot. By age 15, I was having that affirmed by a psychiatrist. By age 17, I was on the hormones, and 19, I went under the knife. Just 6 months later, I detransitioned, and I'm now 23.
Oh, that was fast.
I can dig in deeper, but that's the nutshell.
And we will. We're going to be digging into this throughout the whole episode. So my particular fascination is what you've done since you detransitioned, how you are understanding what happened to you and how you're understanding what cultural forces collided in which this event could have happened in your life and in many others. Can you just remind me, what's the name of your wonderful dissertation?
Yeah, it's Scroll, Click, Become: Why Social Media Deserves or Demands Psychosocial Scrutiny.
Okay, that's what I want to talk about. Cool. Is that okay, Stella? Can we go there? Is that?
Of course.
Okay. So first of all, I love the identity development side of it. That's why I love the dissertation so much. I think you've got Erik Erikson in there. You've got James Marcia. And you talk about how, I grew up, I'm Gen X, so I grew up in the real world. I had a real embodied adolescence hanging out with friends, and that's how my identity formed. And you talk about what it's like to form an identity online. Can you give us a quick Erikson, Marcia, what they said, and how everything's gone a little bit awry in the internet era?
Yeah, of course. So Erik Erikson is one of my favorite theorists. He believed that we developed a sense of self and just a personhood in stages that were age graded and built off of one another. And from the earliest years, this manifests as trust versus mistrust, a very embodied experience where we learn whether or not to trust the world based off of whether our caregivers respond to our needs, right? You cry, you're fed, and then that progresses into, you know, autonomy versus shame and doubt, where you learn whether or not you're able to do things on your own through, for example, toileting. And adolescence is no different. Adolescence, you face identity versus role confusion. You're figuring out who you are. And that's where Marcia comes in. He believed that we achieved this identity, which again, Erickson believed was embodied by balancing crisis or exploration with commitment to a particular role. So that's like, I guess, the overview of them two. But what's so different about today's crisis is that you're being fed the information you would normally be getting through the course of, you know, playing outside with your pals or going to the school dance in this little bite-sized, manipulative, algorithm. And I become concerned when I think about those previous experiences historically being embodied, right? Through feeding, through toileting, through the physical embodied experience of puberty. And now it's all happening in cyberspace, which is two-dimensional, doesn't bring in your other three senses aside from the audio and the visual. And how are you supposed to integrate those things if you never use them?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And even, so much of adolescence is dating.
Yeah.
And no one's dating anymore, even because it's all online. There's
another part of Marcia, though. He kind of coined the phrase the identity crisis.
Yeah.
And what has this been but an identity crisis? But we just took it literally rather than metaphorically for how James Marcia would have understood it. We've really left that behind, didn't we?
Yeah. 100%. Does he also have is it him with identity moratorium?
Yeah. So he actually
Erickson,
divides.
or is it?
Is it Erickson or
I'm not
Marcia?
Sure.
Yeah, Marcia talks about identity moratorium. He divides that struggle between crisis or exploration and commitment into 4 categories. What he says is healthy is identity moratorium, where you're doing a lot of crisis, a lot of exploring, but this isn't just like surface level exploration. It's deep, thorough exploration without commitment. And then eventually you can commit, and that's identity achievement. But where you see this go awry is with identity diffusion, where there's really no commitment and no thorough exploration, and identity foreclosure, where there's a lot of commitment, right? But not a lot of exploration either. And I'm thinking of when I see these people on social media, these kids on social media, that diffusion, because you're kind of brought wherever the algorithm takes you. And what we see with diffusion is people often holding very firmly onto identities to the point that it seems like commitment and exploration, right? But it's almost like a facade. They're not engaging deeply with it, and they're definitely not committing to it when you see them move on to the next thing next week.
Yeah, but there's some kind of commitment there when you put it online because it lives forever. I think about all the stupid things I said as an adolescent, all the stupid opinions that I had that nobody will remember because we were all living in the real world, and I didn't put it online and it couldn't be screenshotted and archived and saved forever.
I would die.
Absolutely.
I was wrong, though, and that's in the internet forever. It is Marcia who did the identity moratorium.
Well, they're so related. It's so hard actually to separate the two from one another. I don't see the purpose in it oftentimes.
Right.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, and to your point briefly about having things online forever, people did get to move on once upon a time. You got to kind of leave those embarrassing teenage years in the past. And maybe that's part of why people felt more free to explore. When it came to dating, you embarrassed yourself a little bit, but that girlfriend wasn't going to drag up the receipts, a decade into the future, was she? Yeah. So it's a huge difference now.
And so that's the general sense. Of course, we have to go to... I'm constantly now thinking about trans in the context of the idea, the overvalued idea, the belief that draws people in. And so your work is fascinating to me because you talk about the algorithm. So you're growing up online, it's disembodied, and you talk about algorithms feeding you content so that it becomes almost cemented. It feels really, really important and overwhelming. But when you throw in trans as an idea, this idea that you need to medically alter your body and that's the path to salvation, and you feed an overvalued idea into an algorithm, into the adolescent mind, obviously you know firsthand, but they can lead people into a very destructive path. Can you talk about, in general, first of all, your experience of encountering this idea that trans is a type of person, and then the broader sense of how it's dangerous for everyone?
Yeah, I first encountered that idea when I was 11. I was in these art forums online, role playing with other little girls and boys, mostly other little girls. And it was very innocent at first, right? I just had this idea proposed to me. And keep in mind, when I was 11, this was back in like 2013. This was 2013. This was before we saw this huge spike, or actually right as we were seeing this huge spike in the rapid onset variety with young girls.
Yeah.
And it was also around the time that we got forward facing cameras on phones, and algorithms became more the way we were given content in social media platforms became more algorithm based rather than chronological. Instagram came around this time as well.
Yeah.
And so then you take this idea from these art forums, which is a little bit more organic in its development, and you put it into this feedback loop, right? Where you have the algorithm taking advantage of your social learning biases to feed you content that's, prestigious, moral, in group, and emotional. And you're just like affirming the algorithm's choice in that by engaging with it. And for me, I got an explosion of content on Instagram. I remember even not even specific to the trans phenomenon, I was getting self-harm content, eating disorder content. And this is stuff that, Meta, the parent company of Instagram now, is being taken to court for.
Yeah.
So it's I was no exception to what we see generally with the algorithms and how they take advantage of young people's minds in this way.
Wow.
Do you remember what the idea was? Do you remember the first encounter with the idea? Was it some people, just trans people exist, some people are trans?
So it was more conceptual than that, interestingly. There was this 14-year-old girl, we were like dating, but it was like e-dating, right? You just kind of drew each other's characters kissing. And
you were 14 too?
I was 11. So 11. She was a few years older than me. We were both still pretty young though. And I looked up to her because she was an amazing artist. When she had started talking about, well, I feel like a boy. I remember there was this piece she had drawn where she did like the silhouette of herself upset and crying, and the head was blue and the body was pink. And so it was this idea of like, I have a man's brain, I have a boy's brain, but a woman and a girl's body. And I feel like I'm in conflict. She had used this quote, "I'm not comfortable with the female role," because she was going to this Catholic school and was being forced to, like in theater, play as the women and the girls. And she wanted more, I guess, freedom than that. And that really resonated with me as a tomboy, as someone who was, so into sports. I would get, styes. I was called dirt baby by my coaches. I didn't want to leave that tomboyishness, that freedom of childhood behind.
So fascinating.
Wait, just ask a little bit more about this girl. So the idea, when you say conceptual, what was the conceptual idea? It was like that other people can be trans. And what
the boy, the boy brain in the girl body, is that?
Yeah. The trans label was there, but it was more of a background thing. It wasn't so central, I guess, to that experience we were trying to identify.
And when did it kind of go into you could be, if you follow me? When did it kind of pass over?
Yeah, well, I remember she and I had a lot of conversations. We would FaceTime on our iPods for hours and hours and hours. And I remember thinking like, this, I kind of relate to it because I was already wanting to cut my hair short, and it wasn't because of an identity thing. It was just, I played sports, hair got in the way, and I felt very altruistic. I wanted to donate my hair to, little girls who had cancer. And so seeing her talk about this experience of, well, I'm uncomfortable with the female role. And, I kind of look like a boy anyhow, or I want to have short hair and that would make me look like a boy. It was very stereotypical. It was very shallow.
You were 11.
You were 11. Okay. So then do you remember the idea becoming more powerful, taking over and becoming the all-consuming need to be a boy or need for the medical treatment?
Yeah, well, it was at first, it remained that role play identity for a while. I was on social media, so I was continuing to be fed content of this variety on Tumblr, Instagram, some Reddit. But it wasn't until 2018 when I met my biological father for the first time that it became a medical reality. I remember up until then, I would go by a boy's name and pronouns with my friends. My teachers would use the name, but not the pronouns. It was very lightly affirmed, but I would also be showing up to school in a flower crown and a dress. And I only, was binding my chest half the time. It was a very diffuse identity, right? It was not anything kind of coordinated. And then when I went inpatient to this psychiatric facility from freaking out because I met my dad for the first time, I remember he was very curious about, well, why is your name different on the door than it is on your chart? And, oh, you say that you're really happy at this summer camp that you go to every year where they affirm you with that name and pronouns. You can tell me, if you feel this way. I won't tell your parents. That was the gist of how the conversation went, the essence of it. And so I told him, like, yeah, I wasn't planning on telling my family until I was 18, so don't tell them. But like, yeah, I do kind of feel like a boy, and I would like to maybe do something one day. And it was still very far out though, until he turned around, he told my family, and half my family, the dad and stepmom I just met, chose to affirm me, while my mom and my stepdad kind of dug their heels in and said, whoa, 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 we thought you'd like girls, but this is out of it. I know.
I know. I just can't. I mean, that's iatrogenic would be the word.
Yeah. And when did you medicalize? What age?
I was 17. So it was about a year and a half after that experience with that psychiatrist. I'd been going to a support group with my dad and my stepmom for some time. And my mom tried one session of that. Like she hung out with the parents and the parent support group. And she just felt like there was a lot of pressure to not ask questions, which was her maternal instinct, right? And in that support group, that was where we met the nurse practitioner who had prescribed me hormones without my mom's consent at age 17.
And you were immersed in it. Did you sense the idea spreading throughout the online world? Could you see that happening in the worlds that you were in?
Yeah, I could. And part of that was because I saw my own involvement spreading, right? I saw more groups appearing that I could join. I was in probably 1,000 Facebook groups at one point. Online. It was a part of this little network called Left Book, a bunch of leftist Facebook groups. Wow. And this was mirrored in real life. I remember when I was in middle school, there was me and maybe one other girl who identified as trans, but there wasn't really anyone offline at that point until I went offline. Or I went online for high school for a couple of years. COVID happened. I went to college, and all of a sudden there was trans people everywhere. I remember that was a huge turning point. I noticed.
And how does it feel when you see people saying, "Oh, we don't know why the numbers are surging. We're not sure if it's social contagion." How does that feel when you were in the midst of it?
It feels a little bit unreal, I guess, that people would say that. And I can't blame them on one hand, right? Because not everybody is chronically online in the way that I was to have witnessed that firsthand. But at the same time, I think a lot of people were. And it's almost like a frog in the pot situation where people weren't really aware of it because they weren't, in a way, I was both the frog and I was the person adding the seasonings and turning up the heat. And so when you're someone who is just a frog, you're not really as aware of the temperature rising. So I do think at this point, though, with all the research coming out with Jonathan Haidt and Twinge, talking about the turning points, 2014 being one of them in this area with trans identity, and also just kids kind of going bonkers generally. I don't think it's as easy to turn a blind eye. I think at this point it's kind of just purposefully ignorant.
And how did you start to relinquish your overvalued idea? Like, how did it start to shake or shatter? Especially the first seeds of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I wish I knew who said this. It was someone I had actually heard talk at one of the GenSpect conferences.
Oh, very good.
But for me, it was like a pebble moment. Like there was lots of little pebbles that were dropped in, and it eventually, those pebbles, they add up to this mound that
Oh, that
can
might be
help
me.
you.
I used to always say
It might
pebbles
have
in a
been you,
barrel.
yeah. But
Oh, I love this. Right.
yeah, it was a lot of little things at once. It wasn't, or a lot of little things over time. It was not any single thing at once. And, it came from a mixture of just learning more about our status as a species. Like, what does it mean to be a primate, to be a human being? What does it mean to develop identity, right? I was learning about identity as social and just the importance of role models. And I remember at one point hearing the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that language both reflects reality and comes back in this feedback loop to shape it. So if I felt so disturbed by female pronouns and the verbiage around womanhood, was that both forming my concept of what womanhood was, and then when I went to reject that language, reaffirming that concept for other people. And
What
I
was
just
that
felt so
called
guilty.
again? Sorry, what was
I think
that
it's
called
like
again?
the
The
Sapir-Whorf. I don't think I pronounce it right,
Okay,
but one
I'll
of those
look
two.
into it. That's amazing. You see, because obviously I'm deep in this whole framing of it as the overvalued idea, and one of the key aspects to it is, first of all, the idea takes hold because there's an absence of countervailing perspectives. There's an absence of different
Yeah.
explanations for this one, whatever track you've taken, whatever idea that has consumed you. And then the way out of the overvalued idea is the pebbles. It's introducing the countervailing perspectives, as many as possible, and just loosening the grip, which
Exactly.
seems like it's exactly what happened to you.
Yeah, I remember the way it kind of came to a head was I'd been primed through these little pebble moments to finally listen to a turf. And I remember when I slowed down, I was like, wait, you're saying that female equals woman equals stereotype, and I could just drop the stereotype part of that definition and just have it be female equals woman? Like it became like a
Who is the
no-brainer, I
term?
guess. It was just someone on Tumblr. I wish I had a reference, but it was just some random person on Tumblr, and that was huge.
Well, and how was it? Because you speak about it so eloquently now, and you seem
Yeah.
so upbeat. But how was that moment, or when you first listened to the turf, or the little gradual adding of the pebbles? What how did it feel?
It felt tough, but I was also taking in a lot of content and just thoughts around mindfulness at that time. The idea that difficult things can actually be really good for us, that my body's stress response isn't always, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Sometimes it's you're prepared for this battle. And so when I thought about, I mentioned a moment ago that guilt, right? This idea that I could be passing on such a rigid concept of womanhood and being female for other little girls, other 11-year-old little girls out there. I felt like it was my duty to put myself aside and to work through that discomfort. And not only would I maybe create a better world for other people, but I might actually come to overcome that discomfort with time, which I have. And so it was really tough, but to me, it was metacognitive. I knew that toughness was an essential component to getting better, that I couldn't reorganize myself without breaking myself down first.
And the idea of you doing it for somebody else, it's a real sign of mental health, that altruistic feeling of, I have to think about other people. In a way, it was a sign you were on the right road, because when you start thinking of other people, it's a real sign that this person, I know it from my work, it's a sign this person's they're going to be okay, because they're thinking of other people and they want to help other people. But
Yeah.
there's pebbles in a barrel. Aaron Friday has released this extraordinary series through Genspect, which is about desistance, 16 desistance stories. And they're going to
Wow.
be released all through March for people to hear. And you know what's amazing, Soren? Like, it's so many of them are pebbles in a barrel. When you hear the parents talk about the desistance, now there's 16 different parents talking about desistance of 16 different kids, and you're like, it's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. There's no kind of da-dum, this is what to do. It's pebbles in a barrel. It's throw this, throw that, throw the other. And I've seen that again and again with recovery. There's never, and that's why I have take massive issue with medical transition, because it's offering one solution, and it's like, no, that's not how we
Mm.
humans operate. We need 12 solutions, 15.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'm really excited for that series because I think one of the because role modeling is so essential to our species, one of the best ways to give people proper insights forward is to show them that others have done it before. I know that that's true when it comes to the young people's perspective, that you can show young people in education, for example, that they're able to learn and become more smart over time when you show them examples of seniors who, when they were freshmen, had much lower GPAs, and now they have high GPAs and they're succeeding. And so I think that's really, really good for the parents, and I'd love to see something like that for the young people too.
Oh yeah, there's a few delisters there, but yeah, it's very exciting.
Cool.
Do you think that, when did you move from like extreme pain? Because you must have been, as Mia just said earlier, there must have been a real sense of pain that we're not feeling now, and I don't need you to go back there, but there must have been. When did you, I feel the same when I talk about my childhood, it's just like it was a different world way back then. But when did you move out of real distress into a calmer place mentally?
Yeah. And that's, I guess, one of those pebble moments, right?
Yeah.
Where I don't know that I can cleanly mark, this was the moment that I felt better. But what I do know is that over time, in coming to see that pain as a necessary part of moving forward, I was able to kind of lean into it a little bit. And for me, it made the pain less overwhelming and just, this is never going to get better. I've always kind of been strategic, if that makes sense. So even when I was trans identifying, I had this strategic approach to, okay, like, what can I do to help myself feel better? And unfortunately, I was smacked in the face by this medical model that was like, well, there's another drug and there's another therapy you can try. But as soon as I became disillusioned with the medical component, that the strategies were somehow located within this medical establishment exclusively, I think that's where I was able to kind of switch out of that pain as another treatment, as just forever medicalization, and to truly see it as something that, maybe wasn't going to go away, but it almost made it feel good, if that makes sense. Like, I think that was the moment where it switched for me. Wasn't that I stopped feeling pain, but that my perspective on pain and my mindset towards pain shifted. And that was probably around my mastectomy.
Now, did you actually believe that the mastectomy and the hormones were going to bring about some sort of wonderful life? What did you think the treatment would do for you?
Well, that's what's interesting is I don't know, my mindset is so weird sometimes, because I knew it was the next necessary step, right? I'm someone who I have always kind of thought in, here are the things I need to do to get stuff done. And so the mastectomy was part of that. Okay, I identify as trans. Here are the things that I need to do. Here's what feels right. But because it was that kind of shallow feeling, going back to that diffusion in a way, I don't know that there was this real, I need this to fix myself. It was more like, I need this because it's bringing myself into alignment with however I felt at the time. So that's why I think the complications I experienced hit me so hard, because it really jerked me out of that passive acceptance of this framework, where I was a very active proponent of it. But because it was a diffuse identity, there wasn't a lot of depth to the roots. It was all bark, no bite. And when I sat with, okay, these complications are actually like pretty tied to the specific methodology that my surgeons who only operate on trans patients use. And whoa, the surgeons are nowhere to be found. Now that I'm having complications, but they were so eager to take my money, that's when I was kind of like, okay, yeah, this isn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't something I could just passively accept. In fact, it was a real invasive medical procedure.
But you only got there after the fact.
Yeah.
Why?
And after the complications too, because it's something you can't ignore. You can't just take off your medical binder and have a boy chest. I had to manually express the drains they had to sew in while I was awake. It was a really traumatic experience in that way, but I learned from it. Let's just say that.
Goodness me. Okay, where to go from here?
I know.
Yeah. And when did you start to feel that there was, because I'm very into, because it's Detrans Awareness Day, the community, the life after transition, because that's what we call the conference. When did you start to feel like there's a movement, there's more than me who's detransitioning, there's actually a thing here that I could maybe join or something?
Yeah, that's interesting because when I first detransitioned, I felt kind of alone. Like I felt like I had this aha moment of, oh my gosh, if we could just see that we could reclaim manhood and womanhood, like this wouldn't be an issue. And I had gone on this little podcast of this guy who did like, it was like an LGBTQ plus blah, blah, blah podcast. And he was interested in my story. But I remember at one point he had asked me, what do you think of the detrans grifters? Like, what do you think of the grifters out there who are taking advantage of their experience with detransition? Like, how are you different? I was like, wait, what? I was like, hey,
Introduce me.
there's other people. And B, what do you mean
Wow.
grifting? Like, are they just sharing their experiences? Like, that was such a moment of disillusionment.
It's so
And so
derogatory. How
I know
dare
I
he?
was offended. No, that was huge. And so that summer, a couple months later, I remember I had posted my mastectomy experience for the first time on Twitter. And I'd reached out to Buck Angel and I was like, hey, you're the only person I can think of. And
Wow.
can you
Okay.
share this? And Buck went and shared it and it went viral. But I got scared. I around that same time I had lost two friends very tragically in a car accident. And I just like having death so close to me at my age was just very shocking. So I went into myself for about the next half year, did some not, I want to say soul searching, but I definitely like I took a semester off of school, went to the country and learned and lived life a little bit. And when I came back, I reposted that story in 2023. And it just so happened to, I mean, it went viral again, but it just so happened to coincide with the legislative session here in Texas, which is every 2 years. And so I got brought into a Senate hearing on SB 14, which was our ban on gender modification in minors. And I got to meet some other detransitioners for the first time, people who were not just of the same experience of me to some degree, right? But who were willing to speak out publicly on it. And that was just really big to see that not only could I find community with others and maybe in a less toxic way than I had online, but I could also take some of that altruism that I had felt that led me to detransition and I could put it somewhere productive like the legislature.
You see, I'm writing my talk for DC next week. I've been writing it this morning. So this is something that's in my mind. And I love that we're talking about it because many of you adopted trans identities because you were struggling, because you were lonely, you were looking for a tribe, you found your tribe, you find yourself in this world and you medicalize. But I see the kind of the next wave is in the other direction. So it's really hard for the first detransition, as I'm sure it was, that there was no community that you could land into after you let go of this belief. But now there is, and it's growing and it's growing and it's full of really awesome people. And the fact that Richie came out after Detrans Awareness Day way back is just, that shows the contagion element. I don't want to say a social contagion of detransition, but that's really what we're seeing, is it not?
Yeah, and it's how humans work. It really is.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to some of that literature I mentioned just a little bit ago when we were talking about desistance and how young people seeing that this is a possible path forward and that they're not, an exception to the grace and the growth that can come out of things like learning or detransitioning. I think that's huge. And right before I finally, I think, bit the bullet and things started to tumble down, I remember on Facebook, there was another young woman who I had been in all of these left book groups with. And she posted something about her detransitioning and it being related to the way she held on to these stereotypes from, like all the things she learned about what a woman was supposed to be.
Perfect.
And I remember feeling angry at first because I was reading it like, oh, you, like, it wasn't like, oh, you traitor, but it was essentially like, oh, you traitor. Like, what? You're like me. And there was that cognitive dissonance component. But I reached back out to her after I detransitioned and told her, like, thank you. That was huge to see that thought process and to be able to think back to it when I was considering that path for myself.
Right. So it's the idea. That's what I've always been thinking about. The idea that some people are trans spread around and people adopted it and they transitioned. And now it's the idea that you can actually detransition. You don't trans is not real. It's all the idea, the thought is spreading throughout the very same community that got swept up in the beginning. How does it, like, you're one of the ones, many detransitioners are exceptional, and the courage speaking out, the way they tell their stories is amazing. But I followed yours. I think I reported on I was with the Post Millennial. In fact, I know I reported on your story when you first came out. Do you feel a sense of responsibility? Do you feel that you're leading, you're helping guide people out of this?
In some ways, I do. Insofar that was part of my goal to begin with, was to inspire people to see that there are other options out there, and detransition doesn't have to be this ugly, avoidable, treacherous thing. So I do feel that in some ways. In other ways, I don't think it ever truly hits me how much impact storytelling in my life has had on others. Because for me, it's been a very, I don't want to, like, I don't know how this comes off, but like, it's been a very selfless thing. Like, I don't think about it a whole lot. Like, I just do it because it's the right thing.
Yeah.
And so to then get the consequence, I mean, it sounds a lot like how I got into the mastectomy. I didn't think about the consequences, but fortunately in this area, it's paid off for the better. That I do think the consequences of me doing something because it feels right has, it's been for the better. And it's not a responsibility I take lightly.
I don't want to give away all my talk because I haven't written it yet, but I know where I'm going with the talk is it's our responsibility. I guess I see my role, and probably Stella too, in the same way, that it's not just like you're telling your story and you're being the role model to help guide young people out of this medicalized life. And I see my role as detransition is a society-wide thing. Like, we all have to let go of this idea. We all have to accept the fact that we got swept up as a society into this mad idea and believing something that wasn't true, and believing that this type of human existed. So that's going to be like the conclusion of my talk. Do you see, was it difficult, I guess is my question, you individually let go of this belief while most people around you not only fully buy into the belief, but vilify those who let it go? Was that difficult?
It was difficult, I would say, especially given some of the wedge that it's put between me and the affirming parts of my family.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely mourn that idea of us versus them that I had when I was in transition, because since detransitioning, I'm not so black and white with how I view people. I'm a lot more dialectical in my thinking. And so it's, I think, tough in a very specific way that I feel this distance, I feel this divide, but it's no longer just because they're evil and I'm not. It's because it's an overvalued belief, right? Like, it's really hard to let go of. And especially for the parents and the family members who have affirmed this in their children and in their loved ones, like, that's going to be a really difficult thing to walk back from, though it is a necessary one, might I add.
So what, are you telling me that the affirming side of your family, you have distance from them because they still buy into this belief and you let it go?
Yeah, my stepmom actually is a therapist now, and we had some talks where she had said to me, you know, trans people do exist, you just weren't one of them. And it was a really painful. That was actually, I think, one of the most painful moments out of all of this. Wow. Because I felt very close to them, and I still have a lot of empathy for them, and I don't want them to receive hate, you know, to be very clear. But it was a moment of, you watched all of this, you saw me in such a vulnerable state, and the cognitive dissonance just seems a little bit stronger than that reality in front of them. So.
But you see, she and all like her are also in the grips of the overvalued idea. That's the madness of this one. Normally, an overvalued idea is in the individual. It can be shared in a culture, subculture, but this is large swathes of the population are very much in the grips of it and acting in its service, doing harm. She's done harm, and so it's going to be hard for her to let go of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whew, okay.
Yeah. Could I ask, you know, when you're you started to find your feet really with having moved on from the transition and the detransition. Do you think that there's anything that needs to be said to the people who are maybe watching this and they've transitioned and they're kind of, we call them in the groups, we have like lots of groups in Beyond Trans, loads of different groups, and we call it, well, I call them detrans curious, that you know what I mean, they're starting to kind of check out this, and I think just, once the seed grows, it grows. So do you think that you have anything to say to them? I think it's kind of important to think of those people at all times, really.
Yeah.
I agree. I would say to embrace some of the discomfort you might have felt while watching this interview and while listening to this podcast, because there's a moment between an awareness, right, where we know that a change needs to be made, whether that's somatically or intellectually, and the moment that we actually exhibit change in our behavior. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be, just generally. It's really difficult to be there. But it also means, because learning is often hard, right? If learning is easy, you're probably not learning. That you're at that edge. You're at that cusp of something greater, of your brain finding a new pathway to handle this, these feelings and this distress. So I would say lean into that. It's not going to kill you. That is actually the most important part, is to be uncomfortable and to question that discomfort.
Well, that's gorgeous. That
Yeah.
is gorgeous. Can we go back to online, growing up online? Less so with the trans issue. I do believe we're going to get rid of this idea, this overvalued idea. We're going to be rid of it hopefully soon. But do you feel that there's hope for adolescents? Is there a way to grow up online and to still be a fully developed, embodied human being, or is it one or the other?
I think the solution probably lies somewhere in the balance, because we're not going to undo the internet tomorrow.
No.
It's a difficult thing I've actually to sit with, because I'm sitting here, I was married recently. I'm considering, like, okay, what happens when I start a family? I'm an intellectual. I use the computer a lot. What does that look like for my kids watching me? And I've come to this understanding that it can be a good thing. When we're talking about strategic mindset, for example, one of my mentors, she brought up that in some Facebook groups, right, we have the splish splashing around of identity politics and blah, blah, blah. But we also see people who maybe in a cooking group talk about, hey, I've tried this new thing. What have you guys tried? And so there are spaces online where you can trade information and support one another, and it be a very positive thing. But what I've noticed, and this is anecdotally, this isn't necessarily in the literature yet, if it is, cool, if not, but it seems like those experiences are tethered to the real world, right? If you're looking for advice and sharing experiences about cooking, you're cooking in the real world.
Yeah.
If you're writing, you're doing this task, of writing. It's not just consumption online. So it's a fine line. I don't quite know all the answers, but I do think it's not having the internet unfiltered infinity at 13 years old. That's for sure.
Yeah. And those fan fiction, what do you call them? Is it fan fiction or whatever?
Fanfic, yeah.
Yeah. That's like talking about things online, creating things online. There's never a reality. It's such a good divider. You know what I mean? That's all virtual.
It's a huge thing too, because when you're younger, that line between fantasy and reality is one that you have to explore to reality test to know what is real. So when you're not really given the real world in a embodied, significant way, you're not necessarily able to distinguish that fantasy from reality. And we're seeing that in the role play, right? Role play is very natural. It's very healthy for young people. Kids play cops and robbers to learn what it's like to be brave and mischievous, but you have to make that bridge to real life at some point, and we're just not seeing kids doing that.
I think, we talked to Chris Kalibi yesterday. We recorded with him just yesterday, and I think he's got this, the potentially being exposed to the thoughts of every human being on earth is too much for us. And did you say something like that in your talk in Albuquerque as well? So how do we grapple with that. We were once exposed to just our own community, and that's who we wrote. Those were our role models. That was where we learned our social cues and formed our identities. And now we're forming our identities based on potentially every human that's ever owned a phone. How can you reduce your child? How can you reduce your world or your adolescents? I have adolescents right now, so I'm asking about mine. How can we reduce their world so that they're getting the role models that mean something to them, not the Kardashians?
Yeah. That was the distinction that I believe I made in my talk, was keeping up with the Joneses as it was, and now keeping up with the Kardashians. I think the best thing you can do is to keep your young people offline for as long as possible, because I had mentioned it's possible to expose yourself to, based off of the averages we know with TikTok, 867 fragments of people a day. And that's just, that's ridiculous. That's 1.6 billion active users. And when it comes to being a parent, right, and your job being to guide, to give your kids information on what's true and good about the world, and then you're having to compete with this really attractive dopamine-driven information online, you're not going to stand up. So you have to remove that avenue of information, at least in an independent manner, going online with your kid to show them what the online world looks like. So when they're 18 and they get a smartphone or they get a social media account, they're not just like, totally confronted with it and then inundated with that information. That's important too. But yeah, taking them offline, if they want to contact their friends, giving them a dumb phone or having them use a landline. I saw a group of parents who they all got landlines and agreed to let their kids chat with each other in that way only outside of school. I just think bringing us back to our roots is probably the most effective way to achieve that.
Are you pro a ban, like a social media ban for under 16s or something?
100%. I absolutely am, because you just can't compete with that content. You absolutely can't. And especially in schools, like, kids don't need what we call the hyperactive hive mind in their pockets. We see this with email. Back 10, 15 years ago, you didn't necessarily have, well, I say 10, 15 years ago, that's my 2020 self-talking. Back in like the early 2000s, in the aughts, if you will, you didn't have Slack in your pocket. You didn't have your email ding, ding, dinging all the time. You could actually turn your brain off when it was time to go be a human being outside of work. And now you have email in your pocket all the time. And we see that with kids, right? When they have social media and when they have this potential availability at school, they can sneak off to the bathroom even and use it. That's just taking up parts of the brain that need to be spent on learning in the classroom, on engaging with their classmates.
Yeah. Some people say, though, it's maybe a more productive or better way to go at the problem with tech and children is get tech out of schools completely.
Absolutely.
Because, what they did to the truckers in Canada and the control, they have over you is quite frightening technically. You know what I mean? So I'm more and more starting to see, well, once they get a ban in, they've actually got a lot of control over our tech, and arguably we need to sort. Yeah,
it's an interesting trade-off.
It's a trade-off. It's a very big trade-off.
Yeah,
and
well, that's where the parents.
That's where it does need a lot of thought around it, and I just think the tech in schools has been an unmitigated disaster. Putting the tech on the homework, so then you can't take the phone off the kid because they need it because they took a photo, and that's really embedded. It's really inappropriate.
Precisely that. I have been hardcore against these Chromebooks from day one, partly because I read books and I print papers and I highlight and I scribble. And if I read something on a screen, I don't retain anything.
Same.
So there's that aspect of it. But
brain.
there is. Right. Yeah. But then the other, what you just said is the worst part for me is, okay, put away the screen, no screen time. Oh, I'm doing my homework. I'm like, I can't get them to put away the laptop because they claim they're doing the homework. I don't know. I snoop and they're very good at switching the tab if quite possibly, but it drives me crazy. Bring back pen and paper. I'm all for that.
Totally. Can I ask you, we're coming up to the end now, Soren, did your dysphoria, because I know like in the groups we run and Beyond Trans, that like for some people dysphoria stays, but they realize medical transition was not a solution. And so they're still grappling with, they want to be, for example, let's say a girl, she wants to be a boy. So if she comes across as too feminine, like an anorexic who's putting on weight, it's going into very dangerous territory for her. And so she has to pull away from that so that she doesn't suddenly want to medically transition again. And I've seen a lot of people kind of dread that. For you, and I don't know how well I know you, you have become our super producer, so we get to know each other very well. And may I say, just for everybody who's interested, you've been phenomenal in helping me organize this conference.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been really, really amazing. But did your dysphoria go, or did it dissipate, or did it eventually go? What was your trajectory?
So I would say my perspective changed a lot. So on one hand, right, there's two components. On one hand, I stopped putting myself in triggering environments. For example, I have people who, I love, who have been on hormones, and we can have conversations where they admit, like, yeah, I don't actually think I'm a member of the opposite sex. I don't really care much for the identity, but this is just what I want to do. And I can accept that perspective, right? But I tell them, like, it's really difficult for me to be around you though, because it's that itch of like, okay, where is it acceptable? Could it have been acceptable for me? And I don't need to entertain that, because I don't know that it's medically ethical at all. And I do value my health. So I do set boundaries when it comes to what I'm exposed to and what thoughts I entertain, because I don't think, just like how having infinite access to thoughts online isn't good for us, I don't think allowing ourselves to entertain anything and everything is good for us either. Right. So that's one. Two, I think that I've allowed myself to see it through a different framework. So when I feel discomfort now in the context of being in a group of all men, right? And they're shooting the shit, pardon my language, but they're going at it, they're talking crap, and I just kind of feel that awareness of like, oh my gosh, I'm the only girl in this circle. I realize, like, okay, that's just a thought. That is just a thought that I have. I can let that be a thought and it can go, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm feeling bad about being a girl. It can just be like, I feel disoriented by this dynamic. It's not necessarily familiar to me. I notice something is off. It's a human pattern recognition thing. And just, I guess, tying that into my larger framework of like, as a human, I'm going to recognize things that maybe were relevant to me 2,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, whatever, and that just aren't necessarily anything I need to act on today. So just keeping in mind, I'm an animal. I'm going to notice things. I don't have to entertain everything. That's the primary thing that's helped me.
Goodness me, that's good.
It's extraordinary. Can I just ask one thing, just because of what you said, and then we'll finish it? Because we're living in this era where Cass has kind of emerged as GC light or something, where she's emerged as somebody who believes that there is I'm calling them these days the tiny minority theory. There's a large cohort of people who we know and love who believe in the tiny minority theory. That is, there's a tiny minority of people who really have trans. Now, they might not believe in this idea that there's a transgender essence, but they think that they would be better off medically transitioning, that this is an appropriate treatment for them. Do you think that, or do you think, is that what you were talking about, that you can't be around that? I wanted to clarify, do you think of that? What do you think of the tiny minority theory? And is that the thing you have to be careful around?
Well, when I'm referencing limiting who I'm around, I'm referencing kind of the reality that people are doing this, right? Like, regardless of my approval of it, it's the state of medicine and culture right now. That said, I personally think as long as this is an option, people are going to be drawn to it. Yeah. So if we can ethically understand that there are boundaries around like what we as human beings consider acceptable and ethical, and we make decisions to disallow or allow things based off of that awareness, that is going to be where we contain this sort of thought. Because we see this with MAID, for example, right? With medical assistance in dying, not to open a can of worms, but in places where that's legal, we actually see suicide go up across the board, not just when it comes to accessing that service. And so when people see things like suicide, which is also known to be socially contagious, as an option, they're more likely to do it. I think if there is a tiny minority of people, if it's not an option, that tiny minority will find a different way to cope. So it's a tender subject, but it's one I do think we need to talk about more. And no, I don't believe that there's like such a thing as a true trans person. And I don't know that doctors should be doing this at all.
Great.
But that's just my perspective. I don't speak for Jinspec.
Oh no, that was perfect. Happy Detrans
really
Awareness Day, everybody. It's just one thing. It's really lovely to see the liberation that comes across so many. I've seen hundreds of detransitions people now, and again, I get a feeling of liberation when they're talking. They've thought things out, and they know it might be a lot of pain, but they know where they're going. And you're a lovely example of life after transition. You really are, Soren.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.